couple things I want to go through today is I'll take you through some kind of consumer trends, which I think are very important to help inform you guys of decisions you're making internally at your organizations, as well as when your business partners come to you to make recommendations around resources and asset they might have that you have some of this context for why they may be asking for some of this stuff. Some other areas we'll go through is content. I'm a big believer in content. I think content's probably the biggest differentiator out there. We'll talk about that a lot. We'll talk about the power of data. And then I'll try to bring it all together in terms of what this all means in terms of distribution and trends in the distribution space in general, how all this comes together, and then I'll leave you with a few recommendations on how to think about this stuff going forward. So first, let me start with just kind of some consumer trends. So we do an analysis with Compete every year to look at consumer behavior, and this is kind of a shopping cycle which hasn't changed much over the last several years. What has changed a little bit is, so this is the number of travel sessions to booking, so 8 travel sessions spent until I actually book a trip, 17 sites, so obviously a very involved process. That number's actually come down a little bit. I think a couple years ago it was probably around 21, 22 sites. So that's actually come down a little bit, which says a couple things. I think one, it says that consumers are starting to get better answers to their questions and able to move down that process. So that's a lot of the waste that might have been there kind of early on has started been factored out a little bit. And then the kind of search kind of thing has remained somewhat similar in terms of the conversion. The one thing that you'll see on there in blue is the amount of time spent. So 1.5 time shopping process is spent more than it was 3 years ago, which is unbelievable, which also tells you there's a lot of content out there. There's a lot of good, compelling content out there that consumers want to engage with and experience as they go through the search funnel, the transaction funnel, and very involved in that process. So to me, the game changer in all this has been mobile. And I know Dave's going to talk to you guys in a little bit more specifically about mobile. But I can think back to like my early days of Choice. Everybody was like, this is the year of mobile. And then the next year would come and this is the year of mobile. And then 5 years would go by and like, this is the year of mobile. And I can remember vividly when I was on the advertising side of the business at Google is we started to see queries really creep up to, when it was in single digits, it was interesting, but it wasn't that meaningful. And we'd start to, get feedback from our partners. Well, what's mobile business look like? Yeah, it's interesting, but it's kind of a rounding error. So a lot of headspace really wasn't put around it. And then, if you kind of look back, 3+ years ago when we launched Android, and we're now fast forward, several years later, activating 1.5 million devices a day, which is staggering. I think we're probably close to high hundreds of millions of phones that are in the marketplace. So with that, in addition to smartphones with iPhone, et cetera, is people started doing more queries on mobile devices. So all of a sudden, like a couple years ago, I think it was mid-year, we're starting to see queries rise, north of 10%, into the teens, north of 20, and then all of a sudden we're like, we got a little problem. So we, two problems. One is our partners weren't ready for it. Their sites weren't great, conversion's terrible, and from a kind of advertising standpoint, we're all about desktop, optimizing around desktop, sending the best traffic, and all of a sudden you look at mobile and then, we wake up overnight and we have a challenge, right? So what that means is if it's not converting well, there's, our partner sites aren't that great, not gonna spend as much money with you if that's the direction that query volume's going. So that was a big wake-up call for us. So, we've learned a lot over the years about mobile. A couple things I think is unbelievably important is that the research process is actually starting in a lot of cases on mobile devices. Like I think about my personal experience every day. For good or bad, I live 50 miles outside of Manhattan. I commute into Manhattan every day. And now with the kids, I drive more than I take the bus, so I can have a little flexibility of departure and arrival. But I do, 90% of what I do on my phone. So I may start a trip research on my phone. I may end it when I get back home that night on my desktop or my tablet. But the fact that experience is starting on mobile devices is, I think, a big wake-up call for a lot of folks. So in theory, it's the first opportunity for you all and your brands to engage with customers as they're early in that transaction process. To me, this is and ignore all the numbers on here, but the key takeaway here, which is probably the most important slide during the presentation, is that people are going across devices. So They may start on their mobile device, but for all these activities you see on here, from research to looking at reviews, to looking at photos, to watching videos, to checking in, that's done across different devices. So what that means is, in the kind of old world, and dealing on the advertising side for so long, where everybody looked at last click attribution, that's the holy grail. That's no longer the case anymore. So if I'm experiencing a shopping process across different devices, across different screens, something needs to change in terms of how attribution is provided to those different spaces. So this is the perfect example. If research is starting on mobile devices, and 25% of the time conversion is happening on mobile devices, and I just sat with probably a handful of partners over the last several weeks talking specifically about mobile, and the conversion rates still aren't very good. I'm hearing conversion rates less than 1% for most of these folks, at the high of 2%, which is really, really good, but still a very challenged environment. But if I'm starting my research there, and for those consumers starting their research on a mobile device, if 25% are converting, 75% are converting somewhere else. So what's that mean? You're probably undervaluing the value of mobile overall in terms of how you look at it internally, and then from a distribution standpoint. So all of a sudden, if I'm working with a partner on their advertising strategy and conversion's not great, and mobile is actually influencing that conversion, but they're not giving any credit for it, from a distribution standpoint, mobile looks like it's not doing very good. So when they come to you internally and say, hey guys, we need to invest in mobile, we need to improve our mobile experience, you guys are pushing back saying, well, where's the dollars, where's the conversion? The reality of the situation is it's influencing the process, and we'll talk about some recommendations on how to think about that going forward. I'll give you another example of what happens in reality is, let's say you're driving down I-95 and you do a search for hotels near me. So that's the other phenomena we've kind of learned over time, is the last minute close-in booking. So bookings happening within 24 hours, within 5 to 10 miles of the location. I mean, think about kind of our lives in business travel. Like a couple years ago, you never dreamed of getting off a flight without your hotel being booked. Now a lot of people do that. I haven't made that leap yet because I go to Mountain View a lot in San Francisco, and the hotel situation there is pretty tight. So, but people actually do this. So with all that last minute kind of booking activity happening, how do you kind of plan for that? So if I'm driving down I-95 and I do hotels near me, and an advertising unit we have is kind of click to call, where I click a button and it goes into the call center, it goes directly to the property. They could convert. The reality of the situation is, for the most part, the tracking for that's terrible. So a conversion was driven. It was driven in an offline environment, but nobody knew what happened. And so consequently, from a distribution standpoint, that click on a mobile device got no credit, and then consequently, your e-commerce teams internally are saying, well, I can't continue to invest in mobile because it's not converting very well. So that's a real life example of how that happens. So if today's consumer is shopping across devices, and they're going across the different screens, and they're going to a bunch of different sites, how are you thinking about your business in terms of organizing in a way to understand that single view of that customer and that conversion path? So it's hard to make decisions if you don't know what that conversion path is for your guys' job internally with your own sites, with mobile, tablet, or desktop. It's also very hard to help your partners internally from a distribution standpoint if they can't understand that conversion path and that distribution path.